The year was 1898. Sir Jadunath Sarkar, an eminent historian, was walking along a narrow lane in Calcutta. It was a fine morning. Unfortunately, it was not so fine for the people of Calcutta because the city was ravaged by the most dreaded disease plague. The posh areas where the Europeans lived were kept spick and span, but the areas of North Calcutta where the natives lived were not cleaned properly. But we cannot blame the tribes for the heaps of garbage that accumulated in the native areas. The people of Calcutta at that time cared little for environmental cleanliness. They kept their own houses clean, but they didn't care if the roads outside their home were dirty. Naturally, such an environment was the breeding ground for infectious diseases. The rich fled from the city. The poor suffered. Those who died were lucky, but those who were alive lived in acute misery. They did not know that they were suffering for their own carelessness. These poor people, Sir Jodhunath might have sighed as he pondered over their miserable condition. Suddenly, he saw a strange sight. At first, he just could not believe his eyes. A European lady was calmly sweeping the dirty road with a broom in one hand and a shovel in the other. When she came closer, he recognized her. Sister Nivedita, what are you doing? He asked. She calmly replied, we must keep the roads clean to kill the germs of plague. I have warned my neighbors again and again, but they did not care to listen to me. So there was no alternative for me but to do it alone. Sir Joduna hung his head in shame. He did not know what to say. Suddenly, his face brightened. He saw several young men of the locality coming out of their houses with their faces red in shame and brooms in their hands. They followed Sister Nivedita and started sweeping the roads. Who is Sister Nivedita? Once a young man asked me. So simple a question, but so difficult to answer. I think Rudyard Kipling could not have written, oh, East is East and West is West, and never the two shall meet. If he had ever met Sister Nivedita, she belonged to the West before she came to East. She was European, yet she loved so passionately India that the very expression of her face changed as she uttered the name of her adopted country. Bharat Varsha, she would say very slowly and respectfully, putting emphasis on every single word. She was Miss Margaret Noble before she came to India. How did the transformation take place? In her famous book, The Master as I Saw Him, Sister Nivedita says, the time was a cool Sunday afternoon in November, and the place a wasted drawing room. It was there she first met her master, Swami Vivekananda. He faced a half circle of listeners with the fire and the heart behind him. It seemed to Sister Nivedita as she listened to him while twilight passed into darkness. They were in India, gathering round a sadhu who sat among them in his crimson robe and girdle. As he spoke, Shamiti said, now and again, Shiva, Shiva, which seemed very strange to her, but she did not fail to notice that he had that look of mingled gentleness and loftiness that one sees on the faces of those who live much in meditation, that look perhaps that Raphael has painted for us in the brow of the Sistine Child. Next year, during a course of conversation, Swami Vivekananda turned to her and said, I have plans for the women of my country. in which you, I think, would be of great help to me. And she knew she had heard a call which would change her life. She came to India because India needed a strong woman like her. At first, her neighbors were shocked when they knew that a Mem Sahib had come to live in Baghbazar. To them, she was a lecturer, which means a person who is untouchable. Nobody would come near her. No maid servant would work for her. But gradually she won them over because she had decided to devote her life to India, and so Indians could not help loving her. Who didn't come to her house in Boshparade to seek her guidance? Scientists, artists, writers, freedom fighters came to her for guidance, and she helped them, guided them, advised them. It was she who encouraged Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose to continue his research and assisted in editing his articles in scientific journals. She started a school for girls in Baghajan because Swami Vivekananda laid much stress on female education. The hurdles she had to face, the obstacles she had to overcome, are very hard for us to imagine in the second decade in the 21st century. She went from door to door and begged the parents to send their girls to her school. She was one of the major architects who laid the foundation of female education in India. Again, it was she who asked Abanindranath Tagore to send Nandalal Bose and others to Ajanta and Ellora when an artist friend of hers was studying the paintings of ancient India there. The young artists came back much inspired, and the Bengal School of Artists were formed. It was she who helped the freedom fighters secretly, and many of these secret meetings were held in her house. She helped Sir Jadunath Sarkar to write the history of India from the point of view of an Indian, because the European historians often distorted the facts and used to write their own versions of Indian history. Rabindranath Tagore's famous novel Gora had a tragic ending at first, but Sister Nivedita, after reading the manuscript, told him to change the last chapter of the novel. Rabindranath had so much faith in her literary taste that he followed her advice. That was not all. Sister Nivedita was also an environmentalist. It may sound strange because at that time even Europeans were not much concerned about environmental pollution. There are, of course, poets like Wordsworth and a few intellectuals who were concerned about the hazards of industrialization, but the concept of a clean environment was unfamiliar to the public. Sister Nivedita was shocked when she came to live in Bagbazar. She saw that the people were living there in the most unhygienic conditions, and they were not even aware of the fact. Again and again, she asked her neighbors not to throw garbage on the road. Unfortunately, the sweepers from the municipality were very irregular in native paras. Owing to their negligence, the dustbins overflowed with garbage, and the people had no choice but to throw the household refuse on the road. To solve the problem, she advised her neighbors to complain to the municipality. When this also didn't work, she tried very hard to find a way out of this problem. She asked her neighbors to dump the garbage in the corner of their house and then burn it. The place chosen for dumping the garbage would have to be kept dry by filling it with lime and ash, otherwise foul smell would emanate from it and pollute the environment. It would also become a breeding ground for germs of all sorts of diseases. If a person is sick in your house, should advise them, please burn all the cotton pads used by the patients and don't forget to burn the empty syringe and other things. Sister Nivedita had an amazing eye for details. She had noticed that the neighbors used for their garbage disposal were made of hay. So when they tried to empty them in the dustbins, some particles of dirt, pieces of rotten vegetables, fruits, and scales of fishes remained stuck to their edges. So she advised them to paint the cane baskets with tar. As a result, the baskets would be smooth, particles of garbage would not stick to the edges, and at the same time, it would be easy to clean them. Sister Nivedita also tried to make people conscious about something which was almost unimaginable in those days: water pollution. The traditional custom of the Hindus is to throw all the flowers and leaves into the water after puja is over. Sister Nivedita noticed that by throwing flowers and leaves into the Ganges, people were actually polluting the river. Sacred fire is the best place for the flowers which are used to worship God. She used to tell them, water can be polluted by human beings, animals, and other sources, but fire cannot be polluted. So fire is more sacred than water. Sister Nivedita didn't live long. She worked so hard for her adopted country that she was exhausted. She died young, like her master, but remained an optimist till the end. Her last words were, the boat is sinking, but I shall see the sunrise.